What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about the June 2024 rules update to Warhammer 40k. This is one of the biggest updates that we've ever seen to the game, and changed a lot of not only faction balance, but also core mechanics, including a total overhaul to how movement rules work in 10th edition, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. Just a month ago, I made a video talking about how the movement rules were broken down in the core rulebook, which was an unexpectedly controversial topic, and I'm glad I did, because a lot of the rules that I brought up in that video have been addressed and improved in this rules update. Now, we're going to be looking in two different places. First of all, the core rules update document, as well as the Pariah Nexus Tournament Companion, which actually modifies the rules that are being modified in the core rules update. It's a little confusing, but bear with me. So what changed were a lot of updates to how models traverse the tabletop while moving. The first change is a clarification, which is expanded on later. It clarifies that when models move across the tabletop, they do so in a series of straight lines and pivots. Curved movement is no longer technically allowed, but is generally not required. In addition, the areas of the battlefield that a model can move through are those large enough to encompass its base. However, for a move to be completed legally, it must have space for its entire model to be placed. So to describe exactly what this means, let's move over to Tabletop Simulator for a demonstration. In the previous rules, although it wasn't spelled out, the implication was that while a model was moving, the model was physically slid across the table. So, for example, if we were playing in real life and I were to be moving Bellicor this way, his wing would contact the terrain feature as he traversed. That would either force him to use through the air movement to move his wing over the terrain feature, or it would require him to pay movement to rotate himself in order to go around the terrain feature. In the new rules, however, a model's position essentially only quote-unquote locks in at the start or end of their movement. So, for example, if Bellicor was behind these buildings and wanted to advance through the buildings, he could do so as long as he had the movement to clear them. So while his model, while sliding across the tabletop, would traverse through the buildings, that is a legal path for him to take. However, at the end of that movement, he cannot be intersecting any of these buildings, because as long as he doesn't have the physical space to set up his entire model, he can't go there. This is essentially just a huge quality of life change. Now you can use proxy bases and other measurement tools to demonstrate your movement to your opponent, and the only thing you have to worry about when doing so is your base. This also, if you have overhanging terrain features, allows you to duck under them in order to move through. If, for example, we had a big archway across these buildings, Bellicor could slide through as long as his base wasn't short enough to get blocked by whatever vertical elements were there, and then as long as he had enough movement to complete that movement without his model intersecting anything, he was good to go. Especially for large base measuring models like Bellicor, this is a huge quality of life update. The other huge change is how rotational movement is measured. Now, in the previous measurement system, a model was able to move the distance traveled by the farthest point of its base or its hull, whatever it used to measure, which would make things really awkward when trying to either measure with circular bases or measure the distance traveled by a big vehicle. So, for example, I have my Land Raider here, and if we were trying to, in the original core rules, measure this Land Raider going around a corner, for example, I would have to measure the point of that Land Raider that moved the farthest. As I'm turning to the left here, it would maybe be the back of my base. So if I wanted to make a turn, I would move the back of my base like 6 inches or so here, and then I could make the remainder of my movement towards that corner. It would end up costing a bunch of movement and being very difficult to measure. The new system is much cleaner, however. Models are assigned a pivot value, which is generally speaking going to be 2 inches. Now, this is defined as monsters and vehicles that are not mounted on round bases in the core rules update. However, the Pariah Nexus Tournament Companion has a rules update to the rules update. As a little bit of an aside, this is incredibly stupid. Just write one version of the rules and make that apply to everybody. Why did we write 2 and then make one of them optional? It's dumb. I'm just going to be talking about the version in the Leviathan Companion right now, because that's what's going to be used for organized play, and it's also a much fairer version of the rule than the one in the core rules update. In this version of the rule, any model model mounted on a circular base, the term used is a round base, but that is a defined term in the core rules update as a circular base, has a pivot value of 2. Now, in the updated rules, when a model decides to move, it always moves in straight lines without rotating at all. However, if at any point during that move you wish to rotate, you simply subtract your pivot value, in this case 2 for a Land Raider, and as the rule has been written so far, it will be 2 inches for every single model except those that are mounted on circular bases. So if you are a biker or a tank, all of those models will have a pivot value of 2. In this case, a Land Raider Crusader has a base movement of 12. It wants to move and it would like to pivot during that move. So it takes its pivot value of 2, subtracts it from its movement value of 12, and gets a total allowed movement of 10 inches. During that 10-inch movement, it is then allowed to rotate freely however much it wants. So if it was trying to turn this corner, it could, for example, move 5 inches, then take a pivot to rotate here, then move another, I don't know, we'll say 3 inches, then it wants to pivot to just get around this corner and move the remaining distance, something like that. As you can see, it's actually able to move slightly farther than it would with the previous system, since it's not having to pay tons and tons of movement to swing its big butt around laterally, and you're able to do so much more easily. You just subtract that 2 inches from your movement, and then you can spin them around however you want. Now, when you're pivoting a model during this movement, you pivot it around the center point of the miniature. There is a whole series of rules that are spelled out in the rules document. They are kind of silly. You're meant to draw an imaginary box with a cross through the center in order to find the center of your model. You basically just find the center of their volume. And for the most part, I don't think those particular rules are going to matter so much. Fortunately for us, we're on Tabletop Simulator right now, which is going to rotate around the center axis of their collider. So the system will actually decide the center of the model for us, which does make pivoting a little bit easier. But generally speaking, you're just going to rotate around their center point while you're pivoting. Now, for as positive as this rules change is, and it's probably going to shave potentially minutes off of your games of 40k and make things significantly less contentious about specific moving individual inches and rotational distance and all that garbage, there are some open questions about it. First of all, pivoting is free for any models mounted on round bases. So this is another rule that's hugely beneficial for large vehicles and walkers, models that have a circular base but overhang that base. However, there are many models in 40k that have a round base but don't necessarily use them for measurement. Good examples are grav tanks or land speeders, especially out of like the Tau and Eldar factions. These things come with round bases but tend to extend pretty far over them and use that hull for measurement. Right now, the implication of the rules is that these models will pivot for free. And while that does sound cool because they are maneuverable pseudo aircraft and rotating quickly makes thematic sense, the problem is that it will potentially allow you to swing areas of that model to gain additional advantage on movement. Units like Drakari Raiders that are very long and skinny and mounted on a round base could use that round base to pivot and potentially swing their bow fairly far and get 3 or 4 additional inches of movement or distance out of it. Whether that is the intention of the rule, I'm not sure, because those models hull measure, so they don't typically use that base for measurement. So whether they are meant to count as a round-based model, I don't know, and it's not really addressed in the rules update. The opposite can potentially be true for smaller models that are mounted on oval bases, because according to the Pariah Nexus rules, these are not mounted on round bases and therefore have a pivot value of 2 inches. Anytime they move and during that move wish to change their facing, they'll have to pay 2 inches of movement. So for example, if we were charging this Land Raider and we wanted to rotate this dude to open up additional real estate to move the other Fleshhounds closer, for example, that move would cost that model 2 inches of movement and would probably not be feasible. Well, for the most part, this isn't going to be a huge deal. It will, when you're making lots of small movements with models with oblong bases like this, get fairly annoying. And I kind of wish that they had given models like these a more lenient pivot value. If they gave them a 1-inch pivot value, for example, that would actually be pretty commensurate with the amount of extra distance that they would have been moving before this change. But 2 inches just to rotate your base like that could actually be a pretty hefty fee. If you don't use the Pariah Nexus rules, however, and models like the Fleshhounds in that example are able to pivot for free, you can do really silly things like set yourself sideways up 9 inches away from an enemy with a deep strike, and then when you go to make your charge move, pivot for free to face your base at them, gaining additional inch or so of movement and making a 9-inch charge out of deep strike an 8-inch charge, which is certainly unintended, and that's why the rule works like that currently in the Pariah Nexus rules. It's probably going to be a question down in the comment section as well, so I do want to address it one more time. As soon as you pay the pivot value for moving, all of your pivots for that whole movement are free. So it's not a cost per pivot, it's a cost for the movement to unlock the ability to pivot, essentially, which then allows you to rotate however many times you want as you're moving that model. These rules are kind of confusing, and there are certainly going to be some edge cases where things probably break a little bit and will have to get shored up in a future update. I do think that overall, the positive benefits to the community and the way that the game is played are going to be huge. This is much cleaner to measure, it's much faster to measure, and overall is going to make for a better gameplay experience. So let me know down in the comment section what you think about these new rules. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video, and thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. We're going to be talking about a lot of the huge changes made to 40k in this update over the course of the next couple of days, so stay tuned for those. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.